All right, let's dive right into this explainer with a question that might just challenge everything you thought you knew about the guy on the $100 bill. Think about it. Who invented the pro and con list? Who mapped out the Gulf Stream? And who built the very first newspaper chain in America? Now, if you answered Benjamin Franklin, you hit the nail right on the head. But if you only picture him as some older statesman flying a kite in a thunderstorm, you are missing out on one of the most dynamic, surprising, and frankly relentless lives in history.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to completely dismantle that two-dimensional caricature of Benjamin Franklin. We'll explore how his insatiable curiosity, which extended from the mechanics of a printing press all the way to global ocean currents, didn't just shape his own fascinating life, but actually laid the blueprint for the entire American ethos. It's going to be a great ride.
To help us wrap our heads around his massive legacy, we're going to use a mental map and explore four distinct facets of his life: the master communicator, the relentless tinkerer, the essential diplomat, and finally, the evolving American. So, let's kick things off with part one, the master communicator. From runaway apprentice to a literal media mogul. It is actually mind-blowing how fast Franklin completely transformed his circumstances. Picture this, it's 1723, he's just 17 years old, and he basically runs away from an apprenticeship under his brother in Boston. He arrives in Philadelphia as a fugitive with next to nothing. But within just a few years, he sets up his very own printing house, takes over the Pennsylvania Gazette in 1729, and by 1731 he is actively building an intercolonial network of partnerships. He essentially invented the first newspaper chain in America, stretching all the way from New England down to the Carolinas. He figured out really early on that the press was an incredibly powerful tool to instruct society. And he was brilliant at using it. He absolutely loved using pseudonyms to share his wisdom, his wit, and his moral philosophy. Take the famous line, "Fish and visitors stink in 3 days." By selling about 10,000 copies of Poor Richard's Almanac a year under the fake name Richard Saunders, he made his sayings an absolute institution in colonial life.
But here's the thing. He didn't just want to talk at people. He wanted to organize them. So he formed a discussion group called the Junto, which he modeled after English coffee houses where Enlightenment ideas were just flourishing at the time. Now, why does this matter? Because his drive to share knowledge led the Junto to create the Library Company of Philadelphia, which was the very first subscription library. Members basically pooled their funds to buy books that everyone could share. He was actively establishing a lasting culture of civic organization and voluntarism that became uniquely American.
Moving right along to part two, the relentless tinkerer. This was a mind that quite literally never stopped questioning. Just look at this wildly diverse lineup of inventions. You've got the lightning rod, bifocals, the flexible urinary catheter, a musical instrument called the glass harmonica, which, by the way, Mozart and Beethoven actually composed music for, and the Franklin stove. But here is the absolutely crucial point you need to know. Franklin refused to patent a single one of them, not one. He wrote in his autobiography that because we enjoy huge advantages from the inventions of others, we should gladly serve others with our own discoveries freely and generously. Okay, we actually need to bust a massive myth right here. The popular image you probably have of Franklin flying a kite and happily waiting around to get struck by lightning in a storm, that's just a myth. Franklin was incredibly well aware of the dangers of electrocution. In fact, other scientists of his era literally died trying to replicate lightning experiments. The reality shows he used a carefully grounded setup, keeping himself totally dry under a roof just to collect a little bit of ambient electric charge from the storm clouds. He just wanted to prove lightning was electrical, not get electrocuted. And his science wasn't just theoretical. It directly shaped the modern world in highly practical ways. While he was serving as deputy postmaster, he noticed something weird. British mail ships were taking weeks longer to cross the Atlantic than your average merchant ships. So, working with his cousin, a Nantucket whaler captain named Timothy Folger, he charted this massive ocean current and named it the Gulf Stream. By following this new chart, ships could save up to 2 weeks of sailing time. Think about that. Whether he was mapping ocean currents or analyzing weather patterns, his findings had massive, real-world economic impacts.
Which brings us to part 3, the essential diplomat, the global face of the colonies.
A lot of people don't realize this, but Franklin actually lived overseas for a huge chunk of his adult life. He spent over a decade and a half in London as a colonial agent, and then nearly another decade in Paris as the U.S. ambassador. He was, quite literally, the ultimate diplomatic bridge between the American colonies and Europe, and he used his fame and intellect to navigate some incredibly complex political waters. While he was posted in London, he essentially became the primary champion for American interests against taxation.
When Parliament tried to justify taxing the colonies to pay for the French and Indian War, Franklin explicitly reminded them of this number right here, 25,000. He boldly testified that the local colonial governments had already raised, outfitted, and paid for 25,000 soldiers to fight France. That actually matched the number Great Britain itself had sent over.
But his most critical diplomatic masterstroke, that happened in France. Dispatched to Paris in 1776, his rustic charm, he famously wore this simple fur hat around town, and his sheer genius completely captivated the French court. And that massive popularity was absolutely vital in securing the formal military alliance with France in 1778. Without that French financial and military support, winning the American Revolution would have been nearly impossible.
Finally, we arrive at Part 4, The Evolving American, a continuous quest for self-improvement.
Get this. At just 20 years old, Franklin famously drafted a list of 13 virtues to actively cultivate his character. We're showing 4 of them here: temperance, silence, order, and frugality. He tracked his adherence to these virtues meticulously in a little book. Now, he admittedly fell short a lot. He was famously unordered, for instance, but he firmly believed that the continuous pursuit of character growth made him a better and ultimately a happier man.
Now, looking impartially at his incredibly complex life, we have to acknowledge the historical reality. In his earlier years, Franklin participated in and profited from the institution of slavery. He owned at least 7 enslaved people who worked in his household and shop, and he also allowed advertisements for the sale of slaves to run right in his newspaper, the Pennsylvania Gazette. But as we look at the facts of his later years, we see a really striking evolution. After seeing the horrors of the slave trade firsthand and interacting with abolitionists, he entirely changed his stance. He freed his own slaves, strongly advocated for the education and integration of free black Americans, and ultimately became the president of the Pennsylvania Abolition Society. He even actively petitioned Congress to abolish the practice entirely before he died.
So what is the big takeaway from all of this? It's that Franklin's constant evolution, his profound willingness to learn, adapt, and actually change his mind, allowed him to become the foundational architect of the United States. Think about this. He is the only person in history to sign all 4 of these world-changing documents: the Declaration of Independence, the Treaty of Alliance with France, the Treaty of Paris ending the Revolutionary War, and the U.S. Constitution.
I'm going to leave you with this really provocative thought from a letter Franklin wrote back in 1773. Ever the visionary, he wrote, "I wish it were possible to invent a method of embalming drowned persons, to be recalled to life, to see and observe the state of America 100 years hence." Considering everything we've unpacked in this explainer today, his insatiable curiosity, his civic organizing, his brilliant inventions, and his lifelong quest for self-improvement, what do you think this relentless tinkerer would say if he woke up today? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.